You know what's worse than being used for money? It's when you realize you were never even the main character in your own love story. You were just the guy paying for someone else's happy ending. The worst part isn't losing the money. It's knowing. You'd do it all again if she asked, because loneliness makes you stupid in ways you never thought possible. If our stories resonate with you, don't forget to like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from. This story was shared with us by one of our long-time viewers, and he wanted his experience heard. I was sitting in my empty Portland apartment on a Tuesday night in February, scrolling through another dating app that promised to connect me with genuine Asian women seeking serious relationships. My divorce had been final for 8 months, and my retirement felt more like a prison sentence than freedom. That's when Carmela's profile appeared on my screen. 34 years old, a dental assistant from Marikina, Philippines, with eyes that seemed to see right through the camera. Her bio was simple. Looking for someone who understands that love is about building something together, not just taking. I sent her a message, not expecting much. Hi, I'm Marcus, I'm 58, recently retired from IT consulting, and I believe in second chances. Your profile caught my attention because you seem genuine in a world full of games. She responded within an hour. Hello, Marcus, thank you for writing something real instead of just, hey, beautiful. I work at a small dental clinic here in Marikina. I've never been married, but I believe the right person is worth waiting for. Would you like to video chat sometime? That first video call changed everything. When she appeared on my screen, sitting in what looked like a modest apartment with simple furniture and religious decorations on the walls, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. She spoke softly about her work, how she helped patients who couldn't afford proper dental care, and her dream of maybe traveling someday. I've never left the Philippines, she said, tucking her hair behind her ear, but I think there's a whole world out there waiting to be explored with the right person. We talked for 4 hours that night. She laughed at my stories about debugging code and dealing with difficult clients, and I found myself genuinely interested in her descriptions of life in Marikina, the patients she treated, and her close relationship with her family. My mother always says the best things come to those who wait, she said, as our conversation began winding down. I think she might be right. By the time we said goodbye, I was already planning my first trip to the Philippines. Something about Carmela made me feel like Marcus again, not just a divorced guy counting down the days until death. The next 3 months became a blur of video calls, messages, and growing intimacy that consumed every waking moment. I'd wake up at 5 a.m. Portland time to catch Carmela during her lunch break at the clinic. Good morning, my love, she'd say, always calling me my love in that soft way that made my chest tighten. How did you sleep? We'd talk while she ate rice and fish in the clinic's break room, and she'd tell me about her patients, her co-workers, and the small dramas of daily life that somehow felt important when she shared them. Mrs. Rodriguez came in today for her cleaning, she'd say. She always brings me homemade bibinka because she knows I work through lunch most days. She says I'm too skinny and need someone to take care of me. The afternoon messages came between appointments. Short texts about her day, photos of her lunch, or just thinking of you with a heart emoji. But it was the late-night calls that really hooked me. Those conversations stretched until dawn in Portland, and we'd talk about everything. Our fears, our dreams, our past relationships. She told me about her ex-boyfriend, who'd broken her heart by choosing to work overseas instead of staying with her. I thought we had a future, she said one night, her voice barely above a whisper. But he said I was holding him back from opportunities. Maybe I expect too much from love. I found myself sharing things I'd never told my ex-wife, about feeling invisible in my own marriage, about the loneliness of retirement, about wondering if my best years were behind me. Marcus, she said, I think your best years are just beginning. You just haven't met the right person to share them with yet. That's when the financial requests started, so subtle at first that I barely noticed. My mother is in the hospital, she told me during a tearful video call. The doctors say she needs medication that costs 5,000 pesos, but we don't have insurance. I don't know what to do. I sent the money immediately, about $100 USD. It felt natural, like something any caring partner would do. Then it was her rent when the clinic cut her hours. I'm so embarrassed to ask, she said, But I might lose my apartment. The landlord wants 15,000 pesos by Friday, and I only have half. Another $300. Then money for her mother's follow-up treatment, for her sister's school fees, for car repairs after an accident. Each request came with tears, with genuine distress, with promises to pay me back once things got better. "You're saving my life," she'd whisper. "I don't know what I did to deserve someone like you." I started calculating our future together in dollars sent. Every transaction felt like an investment in the life we were building. By the time I booked my flight to Manila, I'd sent nearly $3,000, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The flight to Manila felt like traveling to a new life, not just a new country. 20 hours of anxiety mixed with overwhelming excitement, cramped in economy class, but feeling like I was flying first class to my future. I'd withdrawn $8,000 in cash before leaving Portland, plus I had access to my retirement accounts through online banking. This wasn't just a vacation, this was me betting everything on love. The customs line at Ninoy Aquino Airport moved like molasses, and the humidity hit me like a wall when I finally stepped outside. The heat was suffocating, the air thick with exhaust fumes and unfamiliar smells, but none of it mattered because I was finally here. The taxi ride to Marikina took 2 hours through traffic that defied logic, past scenes that looked nothing like the quiet, suburban life I'd left behind in Portland. Street vendors, jeepneys packed with people, children playing in narrow alleys between concrete buildings. "First time in Philippines, sir?" the driver asked. "Yes," I said, staring out at the chaos. "I'm here to see someone very special." "Ah, do you have Filipino girlfriend?" He laughed. "Filipino women very beautiful, very loving. You are lucky man." Lucky, that's exactly how I felt. Carmela was waiting for me at a small cafe near the Marikina River, wearing a simple yellow dress that made her look even more beautiful than she had on video calls. But something was different when I saw her in person. She seemed nervous, almost shy, not quite the confident woman I'd been talking to for months. "Marcus," she said, standing up and giving me a quick hug that felt more polite than intimate. "You made it. How was your flight?" "Long," I said, studying her face. "But worth every minute to be here with you." We sat down and I noticed she kept checking her phone, glancing around the cafe like she was waiting for someone else to arrive. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "You seem a little distracted." "Oh, it's nothing," she said quickly. "I'm just nervous. It's been so long since I've seen you in person. It feels like a dream." We ordered coffee and talked about my flight, the weather. Anything except what I really wanted to say. That something felt off. That she didn't seem as excited as I'd expected. But I pushed those thoughts away. This was just nerves. Just the awkwardness of meeting in person after months of video calls. "So what do you want to do first?" she asked. "Maybe we can go shopping or see some sights. There's a nice mall not far from here." Shopping. Not a walk along the river, not going to see her apartment, not meeting her family that she'd talked about endlessly. Shopping. But I smiled and said, "Whatever makes you happy makes me happy." Because that's what men in love are supposed to say, right? My first week in the Philippines should have been paradise, but instead it was a slow-motion collection of red flags that I refused to acknowledge. I was staying at the Marikina Garden Hotel, a modest place that Carmela had recommended, because it was close to everything. Every morning she'd meet me in the lobby, always perfectly dressed, always with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, my love," she'd say, but it sounded rehearsed now, like she was reading from a script. We'd spend the day together, visiting malls, eating at restaurants, taking selfies that she never seemed eager to post anywhere. But there were phone calls, constant phone calls that she'd step away to take, walking just far enough that I couldn't hear the conversation, but close enough that I could see her face change. Her voice would become urgent, sometimes angry, and she'd gesture with her free hand like she was arguing with someone. "Who keeps calling?" I finally asked after the 5th interruption during lunch at a restaurant in Eastwood City. "Oh, it's just my supervisor at the clinic," she said, without meeting my eyes. "There are some scheduling issues. You know how it is with work." But I'd been in management for 30 years. I knew the difference between work calls and personal calls, and these weren't about scheduling. When I suggested visiting her apartment, she'd deflect. "It's being renovated right now," she said. "I'm actually staying with my friend Rosa while they fix the plumbing. It's such a mess, you wouldn't want to see it." Rosa? This was the first I'd heard of Rosa, despite months of detailed conversations about her life. "I thought you said you lived alone." "I do, normally. But Rosa is letting me stay with her during the renovation. She's like a sister to me." Everything required money. The nice restaurants she chose, the shopping trips that somehow became necessities, the transportation costs that seemed to multiply daily. "Marcus, can you help me with something?" she asked one afternoon as we walked through SM Marikina. "My cousin's daughter is getting married next month, and the family needs help paying for the reception. It's such a shame when families can't afford proper celebrations." "Another $500. My mother's medications are getting more expensive," she said a few days later. "The doctor changed her prescription to something stronger." Another $300. I started keeping track, not because I minded spending the money, but because I was curious about where it all went. In 1 week, I'd spent $2,100 on top of my hotel and meal expenses. Every request came with tears, with explanations about Filipino family obligations, with promises that this was the last time. "You're so generous," she'd say, holding my hand. "I don't know what my family would do without you." But she never wanted to introduce me to this family that needed so much help. "They're very traditional," she explained. "They want to meet you properly when the time is right." When would the time be right? I was already here, already committed, already paying for their emergencies. But I didn't ask these questions because I was afraid of the answers, because deep down, underneath all the rationalization, I knew something was wrong. I just wasn't ready to face it yet. The family dinner in Antipolo was supposed to be my introduction to Carmela's world, but instead, it became the beginning of my education in organized deception. "Today is the day," she said, picking me up from the hotel in a rented van. "My family is so excited to meet you. My mother has been cooking all morning." The drive to Antipolo took an hour through winding mountain roads, and Carmela seemed more nervous than excited. She kept checking her phone and giving the driver directions. In rapid Tagalog, "Is everything okay?" I asked. "You seem tense." "I'm just worried they won't like you," she said. But something in her voice suggested she was worried about something else entirely. The house was larger than I'd expected, a 2-story concrete structure in a subdivision that looked solidly middle class. This wasn't the modest family home I'd imagined based on all the financial emergencies. Cars were parked along the street, and I could hear laughter and conversation coming from inside. "Ready?" Carmela asked, taking my hand. The moment we walked through the door, I was surrounded by warmth and welcome that felt almost overwhelming. "Kuya Marcus!" Everyone seemed to shout at once. Carmela's mother, a small woman in her 60s, hugged me like I was her long-lost son. "Salamat, salamat," she kept saying, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for taking care of our Carmela." There were sisters, cousins, neighbors, children running around, and everyone wanted to meet the American who loved their Carmela. The dining table was loaded with food that must have cost hundreds of dollars. Lechon, pancit, lumpia, rice cakes, and dishes I couldn't identify, but tasted incredible. "This is too much," I said to Carmela. "You didn't need to go to all this." "Trouble." "It's not trouble," said Rosa, Carmela's eldest sister, appearing beside me with a plate piled high with food. "This is how we show love in Filipino families, through food and celebration." Rosa was older than Carmela, maybe 40, with the same eyes but a harder edge. Throughout dinner, I noticed she and Carmela whispering together, and Rosa kept watching me like she was evaluating something. "So you're retired?" Rosa asked during a lull in conversation. "What kind of work did you do?" "AT consulting," I said. "Mostly helping companies upgrade their systems." "That must pay very well," she said with a smile that didn't seem entirely friendly. "Carmela says you're very successful." "Very successful." Is that what Carmela had told them? I glanced at her, but she was busy serving her mother more rice. When it came time to pay for dinner, The bill was 12,000 pesos, about $240. I paid it happily, feeling genuinely welcomed by this large, loving family. But as we prepared to leave, Carmela's phone rang again. This time she didn't step away. She answered in English, probably for my benefit. "Hello, what? No, I can't talk right now, I'm with family." But the voice on the other end was loud enough that I caught fragments. A man's voice speaking English with a Filipino accent. "When are you coming home? The kids are asking." Carmela quickly ended the call and turned off her phone. "Wrong number," she said, but her hands were shaking. "Ready to go." That night, outside my hotel room, I heard her having another phone conversation in the hallway. Her voice was urgent, almost pleading. I crept to the door and listened, but she was speaking Tagalog too quickly for me to understand anything except one word. That kept repeating, "Miguel." When she came back into the room, I pretended to be asleep. "Marcus," she whispered, "are you awake?" I didn't answer. I wasn't ready for the conversation that name would trigger. The proposal should have been the happiest moment of our relationship. But instead it became the moment I realized I was performing in someone else's play. I'd spent 2 days planning the perfect evening. Dinner at a restaurant overlooking Laguna de Bay, with a view of the lake that reminded me of the romantic dinners we'd talked about during our video calls. I'd bought the ring at a jewelry store in Green Hills, spending $3,000 on a diamond solitaire that the salesman assured me would impress any Filipino woman. "Filipino women love engagement rings," he said. "Very important for the family to see that the man is serious." The restaurant was perfect, the sunset over the lake was spectacular, and Carmela looked beautiful in the red dress I'd bought her during one of our shopping trips. Everything was exactly as I'd imagined it during those lonely nights in Portland. I waited until dessert to pull out the ring box. "Carmela," I said, getting down on one knee beside our table while other diners turned to watch. "These past few months have been the happiest of my life. I know we've only been together in person for 2 weeks, but I feel like I've known you forever. Will you marry me?" I opened the box, and the diamond caught the candlelight perfectly. For a moment, there was silence. Not the good kind of silence that comes before tears of joy, but the awkward silence that comes before bad news. Carmela stared at the ring like it was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "Marcus," she said slowly, "this is unexpected." Unexpected? We'd talked about marriage dozens of times during our video calls. She told me about her dream wedding, about wanting to find a man who would commit to building a life together. We talked about this, I said, still kneeling, beginning to feel foolish. We talked about our future together. "We did," she said, "but marriage is such a big decision. In Filipino culture, these things take time. I need to think about it, to pray about it, to discuss it with my family." Other diners were still watching, some taking pictures. I snapped the ring box closed and sat back down, my face burning with embarrassment. "So of course," I said, "take all the time you need." That night, for the first time since I'd arrived in the Philippines, Carmela didn't stay at my hotel. "I need to go home and think," she said. "This is a big decision, and I want to make sure I'm making it for the right reasons." Right reasons? What were the wrong reasons? I spent the night alone, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I'd missed. Every conversation we'd had seemed to lead to this moment, but now she needed to think about it. The next morning she called me early. "Marcus, I have an answer." She met me in the hotel lobby, and this time her smile seemed genuine. "Yes," she said, letting me put the ring on her finger. "I want to marry you. I was just scared last night, scared that this was all too good to be true." The ring looked perfect on her hand, and she kept staring at it like she couldn't believe it was real. "I'm sorry I made you wait," she said. "I just wanted to be sure." But even as she said yes, even as we kissed and made plans for our future, together something felt wrong. Her enthusiasm seemed forced, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. And when I suggested we call my family in Portland to share the good news, she said, "Let's wait a little while. Let me tell my family first, and then we can tell yours." More waiting. Always more waiting. Wedding planning with Carmela was like being caught in a financial tornado that I mistook for romantic enthusiasm. The morning after she accepted my proposal, she arrived at my hotel with a notebook full of ideas and a smile. That seemed brighter than it had been in weeks. "I've been thinking about our wedding all night," she said, spreading photos and magazine clippings across the bed. "I want it to be perfect, something we'll remember forever." The vision she described was elaborate. A church ceremony for 300 guests, a reception with a full band, flowers imported from Baguio, a 7-course dinner, and accommodations for family, members traveling from distant provinces. In Filipino culture, she explained, weddings are about bringing families together. It's not just about the bride and groom, it's about showing respect to everyone who has supported us. The costs began adding up immediately. The church rental $2,000, the reception venue $8,000, catering for 300 people $10,000, flowers and decorations $3,000, photography and videography $2,000, musicians and entertainment $1,500. "This seems like a lot," I said, looking at her calculations. "Maybe we could have something smaller, more intimate." Her face fell immediately. "Marcus, this is my only wedding. I've dreamed about this day since I was a little girl. In the Philippines, if you can't give your bride a proper wedding, people will think you don't value her. People will think. That phrase came up a lot during our planning sessions. People will think I'm cheap if we don't have live music. People will think I don't love her if the flowers aren't fresh. People will think I'm not serious about the marriage if we don't invite the whole family." "Who are all these people?" I asked. "And why does their opinion matter more than what we want?" "You don't understand Filipino culture," she said, and there was an edge to her voice I hadn't heard before. "Family opinion matters here. Respect matters. If we start our marriage by shaming my family, how can we build a strong foundation?" Shaming her family. Another phrase that came up whenever I questioned the expenses. But the strangest part was how she avoided discussing our actual future together. When I brought up living arrangements, she'd change the subject. "Should I start looking for apartments in Portland?" I asked one day, as we sampled cakes at an expensive bakery. "Or are you thinking we should live here for a while first?" "Let's focus on the wedding first," she said. "We can figure out the rest later." Later. Always later. When I suggested we apply for her visa so she could visit Portland and see where we might live, she said the timing wasn't right. "It's better to wait until after we're married. The visa process is easier for spouses." When I asked about meeting her friends from work, she said they were too busy to socialize. "You know how it is in medical jobs, everyone works different shifts." But the most concerning conversation came when I suggested we live together until the wedding. "It would be nice to wake up next to you every day," I said, "and it would save money on the hotel." She looked genuinely shocked. "Marcus, I can't do that. I'm Catholic. Living together before marriage would be a sin." Catholic. This was the first time religion had come up in our relationship, despite all those late-night conversations about our deepest beliefs. "I didn't realize you were religious," I said. "We never talked about church or faith." "Some things are private," she said, "but they're still important to me." So I continued staying at the hotel, paying $120 a night, while my fiancée went home to her mysterious friend Rosa's house that I was never invited to visit. And the wedding expenses kept climbing, each new detail requiring another check, another transfer, another investment in our future happiness that was starting to feel more like a bill I was paying for services I didn't fully understand. The Facebook message that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was having breakfast at the hotel restaurant, scrolling through my phone and feeling optimistic about the wedding plans that were finally coming together. The message was from an account with no profile picture, just a generic silhouette icon. The username was TruthTeller2023. The message itself was simple. "Ask her about Miguel," with a single photo attached. When I opened the photo, my blood went cold. It was Carmela in a white wedding dress, standing next to a Filipino man in a barong Tagalog, both of them smiling broadly. He had his arm around her waist, and she was holding a bouquet of white roses. Both were wearing wedding rings. The timestamp on the photo showed it was taken 8 months ago. I stared at the image for what felt like hours, but was probably only Minutes. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of mistake, or maybe a cruel joke from someone who wanted to hurt Carmela. Maybe it was her ex-boyfriend, the one she'd mentioned who'd broken her heart by leaving for overseas work. Maybe he was trying to sabotage her happiness because he couldn't stand to see her move on. But the photo looked real. The lighting was natural, not manipulated. Carmela's smile was genuine, the kind of joy I'd only glimpsed occasionally during our time together. And that name, Miguel, the same name I'd heard her say during her phone conversation outside my hotel room. My hands were shaking when I tried to call her, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried texting, "We need to talk, something important," no response. I spent the day in my hotel room, staring at that photo and trying to construct explanations that would make it innocent. Maybe it was from a friend's wedding, and she was just posing with the groom. Maybe it was old, from before we met, and the timestamp was wrong. Maybe it was her brother's wedding and the man was family. But every explanation fell apart when I looked at their hands. They were both wearing wedding rings, and the way they stood together, the intimacy in their posture, the natural ease between them, spoke of a relationship that went far beyond friendship or family. When Carmela finally arrived at my hotel that evening, I was pacing in my room like a caged animal. "Sorry I'm late," she said, dropping her purse on the bed. "Rosa needed help with something at home." "We need to talk," I said, pulling out my phone. "I got a message today. Someone sent me this." I showed her the photo, watching her face carefully for any reaction. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, her expression unreadable. Then her eyes filled with tears. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "Someone sent it to me. Who is he, Carmela?" She sat down heavily on the bed, putting her face in her hands. "His name is Miguel. He was my boyfriend for 3 years. This photo, it's not what you think. It looks like a wedding photo. It's from his sister's wedding. We were pretending to be married for the pictures because his family kept asking when we would get engaged. It was just pretend, just for his family." Pretend? They were wearing wedding rings. The bride and groom in the background were barely visible compared to Carmela and Miguel, who were clearly the focus of the photo. "This doesn't look like someone else's wedding," I said. "This looks like your wedding." More tears. "Marcus, you have to believe me. Miguel left me for a job in Saudi Arabia. He broke my heart. This person who sent you the photo, it's him. He's been stalking me ever since I started talking to you. He can't stand that I'm happy with someone else." She grabbed my hands, looking directly into my eyes with an intensity that was either complete sincerity or practiced deception. "I love you, Marcus. Only you. Miguel is my past, and you are my future. Please don't let his jealousy destroy what we have." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Because if this photo was real, if she was married, then everything else was a lie. The financial emergencies, the family dinners, the wedding plans, all of it was an elaborate performance designed to separate me from my money. "If he's stalking you," I said, "then we should go to the police. We should file a report." "Yes," she said immediately. "Yes, we should do that. Tomorrow we'll go to the police station and I'll show them all the messages he's been sending me." But tomorrow came and went without a trip to the police station. Carmela had a family emergency. Then she had to work an extra shift at the clinic. Then the police station was closed for a holiday. There was always a reason why we couldn't go, always another urgent matter that took priority over reporting. Her stalker to the authorities. And that photo burned in my mind like a brand, because no matter how hard I tried to believe her explanation, one detail kept nagging at me. In all our video calls, in all our conversations about her past relationships, she had never once mentioned Miguel by name. The decision to hire a private investigator felt like crossing a line I never thought I'd cross. But the photo had planted a seed of doubt that grew stronger every day Carmela postponed our trip to the police station. I asked the hotel concierge, Mr. Santos, if he knew anyone who could help with a delicate personal matter. "Ah," he said, nodding knowingly, "you need someone to check on your girlfriend. This is common for foreign men in Philippines. You want Tony Reyes. Very discreet, very professional." Tony Reyes turned out to be a former police detective in his 50s who ran a small investigation service from an office above a pharmacy in Quezon City. He was direct and efficient, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much human deception. American man, Filipino girlfriend, mysterious photo, he said, looking at the image I'd shown him. I see this situation maybe 5 times per month. You want to know the truth? I want to know if she's married, I said. That's all, just that one fact. Married or not married, that's simple question. But usually the truth is more complicated. You prepared for complicated. I wasn't prepared for anything, but I nodded anyway. How long will it take? 48 hours, he said. Maybe less. Filipino marriage records are public if you know where to look. Birth certificates too. I'll also check social media, local connections, recent photos, standard background investigation. And if she is married, then you decide what you want to do with that information. I just find facts. What you do with facts is your choice. Those 48 hours were the longest of my life. I went through the motions of wedding planning with Carmela, tasting food and looking at flower arrangements, but everything felt surreal, like I was acting in a play where I didn't know my lines. She seemed more relaxed than she had in weeks, probably because I'd stopped asking about the photo and the police report. You seem happier, she said, as we sampled appetizers at a catering hall in Makati. I was worried that photo upset you too much. I trust you, I said, which wasn't quite true anymore, but it was what she needed to hear. Good, she said, squeezing my hand. Trust is the most important thing in marriage. Without trust, we have nothing. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me. When Tony called on Thursday afternoon, his voice was gentle but professional. Mr. Chen, I have the information you requested. Can you come to my office? Just tell me over the phone. Is she married or not? Please come to the office. This is better to discuss in person. The taxi ride to Quezon City felt like traveling to my own execution. Tony's office was small and cluttered with filing cabinets, and he had a manila folder waiting on his desk when I arrived. Sit down, he said. The answer to your question is yes. Carmela Santos is legally married to Miguel Santos. They were married in Antipolo City on March 15th, 2023, 8 months ago. He opened the folder and showed me copies of official documents, marriage certificate, birth certificates, school records. But it was the photographs that hit me like physical blows. Recent photos of Carmela with Miguel and 2 small children, a boy and a girl, maybe 6 and 8 years old. Family photos taken at birthday parties, Christmas celebrations, school events. Photos of a complete family life that had been invisible to me. The children? I asked. Miguel's children from a previous relationship, but Carmela is listed as their legal guardian on several documents. She's been their stepmother for over a year. Where is Miguel now? He works in Saudi Arabia as a construction supervisor. He sends money home every month to support the family, about $800 USD per month according to bank records. $800 a month. I'd been sending more than that in some weeks, supplementing the income of a family that was already being supported by a husband and father working overseas. There's more, Tony said gently. The house where you had dinner with the family. It's owned by Miguel and Carmela jointly. The mortgage is in both their names. The family you met, they're Miguel's relatives too. Rosa is Miguel's sister, not just Carmela's friend. Every piece of information felt like another weight being added to my chest. The family dinner hadn't been about welcoming me into Carmela's life. It had been about evaluating how much money I might contribute to a family that was already complete without me. I'm sorry, Tony said. I know this is difficult to hear. How long have they been together? Before the marriage, I mean. According to neighbors I interviewed, they've been living together for about 3 years. The marriage was a formality, probably for legal reasons related to the children or property ownership. 3 years. While I'd been talking to Carmela for 3 months, thinking I was building a relationship with a single woman looking for love, she'd been married to someone else, raising his children and living in a house they owned together. I wasn't her boyfriend or her fiancé. I was just the ATM. The confrontation at Carmela's real home was the most difficult conversation of my life, but it was also the moment I finally understood the full scope of what had been done to me. Armed with Tony's documentation, I took a taxi to the address on the marriage certificate, a comfortable two-story house in a middle-class subdivision in Marikina with a small garden and children's toys scattered on the front porch. This wasn't the modest apartment Carmela had described during our video calls, and it certainly wasn't Rosa's friend's place where she claimed to be staying temporarily. When I knocked on the door, a small boy answered, maybe 8 years old, with Carmela's eyes and Miguel's nose. "Mama," he called over his shoulder, "the American man is here." Mama. Not Tita, not Kuya, not family friend. Mama. Carmela appeared in the doorway wearing an apron and a look of absolute terror. Behind her, I could see a normal family home. Children's drawings on the refrigerator, school uniforms hanging. On a line, family photos on the walls that didn't include me. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I think you know why I'm here," I said, pulling out the manila folder. "We need to talk about Miguel, and your marriage, and these children who call you Mama." The boy looked confused, glancing between us like he was trying to understand a conversation in a language he didn't speak. Carmela gently pushed him back inside and stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her. "How did you find this place?" she asked. "More importantly, why did you lie to me about it? About everything?" I opened the folder and showed her the marriage certificate, the birth certificates, the photos of her family life that existed parallel to our relationship. "I hired an investigator, Carmela. I know about Miguel. I know about the children. I know this is your house, your family, your real life." She stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language, then slowly sank into a plastic chair on the porch. "I can explain," she said. "It's not what you think. Miguel and we're married on paper, but we're not really together. He works in Saudi Arabia. He's been gone for 2 years. We're like roommates, not husband and wife." "Roommates don't have joint mortgages," I said. "Roommates don't raise children together, and roommates don't send each other $800 every month." Her face crumpled. "How much do you know?" "Everything. The house, the children, the money Miguel sends, the family dinner where I met his relatives, not yours. All of it." For a long moment, we sat in silence while children played in the street and life continued around us like nothing had changed. Finally, she started crying, not the delicate tears I'd seen during our relationship, but deep body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere desperate. "Miguel's contract ends in 6 months, she said through her tears. "He's coming home and I don't know what we're going to do, Dot. The money he sends isn't enough anymore. Everything is getting more expensive. The children need school supplies, uniforms, medical care. I was scared. So you decided to find an American to pay for it. I didn't plan it like this. I joined the dating app because I was lonely, because Miguel has been gone so long. But when I met you, when I saw how generous you were, how much you cared about helping people, I thought maybe you could help us through this difficult time. By lying to me, by making me believe you were single, available, looking for love. I do care about you, Marcus. That part wasn't a lie. You're kind, you're generous, you made me feel special. But I couldn't tell you the truth because I knew you'd leave." The front door opened and Rosa appeared, looking exactly like she had at the family dinner but without the welcoming smile. "Carmela, what's going on? The children are asking questions." "Rosa," I said. "Or should I say Miguel's sister, not Carmela's friend?" Rosa's face hardened. "You hired someone to spy on us. I hired someone to find the truth that you all kept from me." "The truth?" Rosa stepped fully onto the porch, and suddenly I was facing both women. "The truth is that you came to the Philippines looking to buy a young wife with your retirement money. The truth is that you threw money at Carmela like it was nothing, never asking hard questions, never wanting to know about her real situation. You wanted a fantasy, not a real person." Her words stung because they contained enough truth to hurt. I had wanted a fantasy, a second chance at love, a beautiful woman who would be grateful for my attention and generosity. I wanted an honest relationship, I said. I wanted someone who cared about me for who I am, not what I could provide. "And we needed someone who could help us survive," Rosa replied. Miguel works 16-hour days in the desert so his children can have a future. Carmela takes care of those children like they're her own, works at the clinic, manages the household, and worries every day about what happens if Miguel gets hurt or loses his job. You have money sitting in banks that you don't even need. We have children who need food and school fees and medical care. The moral mathematics of the situation was more complex than I'd expected. I wasn't just a victim of deception. I was also a wealthy foreigner who'd been willing to pay for companionship without asking too many questions about why it was for sale. "But the wedding," I said. "You were planning to actually marry me while you're already married to Miguel." Carmela looked up from her tears. "I thought maybe I could get the marriage annulled, or maybe Miguel would agree to a separation. His contract pays well, but it's dangerous work. Every month I wonder if he's coming home. I thought maybe if I married you, if we went to America, I could bring the children later. Give them opportunities they can't have here. Using me to get to America, using my money to support Miguel's children, lying about everything from the moment we met." "Yes," she said simply. "I used you, but you were using me too. You wanted a young, beautiful woman who would be grateful and available and uncomplicated. You wanted someone who would make you feel like a hero for your generosity. Neither of us was completely honest about what we wanted." The truth of that statement hung in the air between us. I had been buying something, even if I'd convinced myself it was love. The question was whether being lied to about the price made me a victim or just a disappointed customer. What happened next was even more surreal than the confrontation itself. As Carmela and I sat on the porch processing the wreckage of our relationship, cars began pulling up in front of the house. Within 20 minutes, the small front yard was full of the same extended family I'd met at the dinner in Antipolo, along with several neighbors who seemed to appear whenever there was drama to witness. Carmela's mother arrived first, taking one look at my face and Carmela's tears before launching into rapid Tagalog that I couldn't understand, but that sounded like a mixture of scolding and strategizing. Then came Carmela's father, Miguel's parents, various aunts and uncles, and finally a small crowd of neighbors who pretended to be gardening or walking their dogs while clearly listening to every word. "What's happening?" I asked Carmela, as her mother pulled her aside for an intense whispered conversation. "I think Rosa called everyone," she said. "This is how Filipino families handle problems. Everyone gets involved." Within minutes, I found myself surrounded by a tribunal of relatives who seemed to have appointed themselves as mediators in this crisis. Carmela's father, a small man in his 60s with graying hair and kind eyes, spoke for the group. "Sir Marcus," he said in careful English, "we understand there is a misunderstanding about our family situation." "It's not a misunderstanding," I said. "Your daughter lied to me about being married. She took thousands of dollars from me under false pretenses." "Our daughter," he said, emphasizing the word, "is trying to take care of 2 children while their father works overseas to support them. In Filipino culture, this is called being a good mother." Miguel's mother, a woman in her 70s who'd been introduced to me as Carmela's aunt, stepped forward. "Sir, you are angry because you discovered our family's private business, but did Carmela not treat you with respect? Did she not show you love and care during your time here?" "She showed me lies," I said, but even as I said it, I remembered the gentle way she'd listened to my stories, the genuine laughter during our conversations, the comfortable silences during our dinners together. Had all of that been performance? "Love and lies can exist together," said Miguel's father, a weathered man who looked like he'd spent his life working with his hands. "Carmela cares for you, but she also cares for her family. In Philippines, we do not abandon family for personal happiness." Rosa, who had been quiet during this family conference, finally spoke up. "Marcus, you came to the Philippines with money you don't need, looking for a woman young enough to be your daughter. You offered to pay for everything without being asked. You wanted to feel like a big man, like a provider, like someone important. Carmela gave you those feelings. Isn't that worth something?" The crowd murmured agreement. Several people nodded. Like Rosa had spoken an obvious truth. I was being painted as a naive old man who had gotten exactly what he'd paid for. The feeling of being needed, wanted, and important to a beautiful woman. "But the marriage," I said. She was planning to marry me while already married to someone else. Marriage to foreigner is different, Carmela's mother said through her daughter, who translated. She says marriage for love is luxury. Marriage for survival is necessity. She thought maybe you could help the family, and maybe she could make you happy. Both people benefit. I looked around at all these faces, some sympathetic, some defensive, all seeming to share a worldview where my outrage was naive and my expectations unrealistic. In their version of the story, I wasn't a victim of fraud. I was a wealthy foreigner who had offered money in exchange for companionship and then gotten angry when I discovered the companionship came with real-world complications. What if I report this to the police? I asked. What if I file charges for fraud? The family exchanged glances, and Carmela's father smiled sadly. Sir Marcus, you gave money voluntarily to someone you cared about. No one forced you. Police will ask why American man gives so much money to Filipino woman he meets on internet, and then gets angry when he learns she has family responsibilities. What crime will they see? He was right, and I knew it. I had no legal recourse because, technically, Carmela had never stolen anything from me. I had freely given money to someone I was in a relationship with. The fact that the relationship was based on lies I'd been too eager to ignore didn't make it a crime. It just made it expensive. The moment that finally broke through my anger and forced me to see the full human cost of this situation was when Carmela's children came home from school. I heard them before I saw them, chattering in Tagalog as they walked up the street, probably wondering why so many cars were parked in front of their house. The boy I'd met earlier, who I now knew was named Carlo, appeared first, still wearing his school uniform and carrying a backpack that looked too big for his small frame. Behind him came a girl, maybe 6 years old, with pigtails and a serious expression that reminded me painfully of Carmela. "Mama!" Carlo called out, pushing through the crowd of relatives to reach Carmela, who was still sitting in the plastic chair, looking exhausted. "Why is everyone here? Why are you crying?" The little girl, who I learned was named Sophia, went straight to Carmela and climbed into her lap without saying a word. She just wrapped her arms around Carmela's neck and held on like she was protecting her from whatever was making her sad. "It's okay, babies," Carmela whispered, switching effortlessly into the voice of a mother comforting frightened children. "Mama just had a difficult day. Everything will be fine." But Carlo was old enough to sense that this wasn't a normal family gathering. He looked around at all the serious faces, then at me, sitting awkwardly on the porch steps with my folder of evidence, and his expression grew worried. "Mama, is Papa coming home?" he asked. "Did something happen to Papa?" Papa. Miguel was Papa, the father who worked dangerous jobs in a foreign country to send money home. I was just the American uncle who had been paying for extras. "Papa is fine," Carmela said, stroking his hair. "He called yesterday, remember? He's working hard so you and Sophia can go to good schools." "Is the American uncle going to help send me to private school like you promised?" Sophia asked, looking at me with curious eyes that had no understanding of the adult drama surrounding her. "Mama said you might help me get piano lessons too." Piano lessons. I stared at this little girl who was looking at me with hope and trust, who had been told that the American uncle might be able to give her opportunities that her hard-working father couldn't afford on his construction worker salary. Carmela had never mentioned piano lessons during our conversations, but apparently she'd made promises to these children based on my generosity. "Sophia, not now," Carmela said gently. "Mr. Marcus has to go back to his hotel now." "But when will he help with school?" Sophia persisted. Rosatita said the American uncle was going to make everything better. I felt like I was suffocating. These children had been living with the expectation that I would be their benefactor, their ticket to better opportunities, their supplemental father figure who would fill in the gaps that Miguel's overseas salary couldn't cover. They weren't part of the deception. They were just kids who had been told that a kind American man wanted to help their family. Carlo studied my face with the serious expression of a child who had learned to read adult emotions for signs of trouble. "Are you mad at Mama?" he asked me directly. "She works very hard. She helps us with homework every night after she comes home from the tooth doctor job. She's a good mama, out of the mouths of babes. Here was an 8-year-old boy defending the woman who had lied to me, manipulated me, and planned to commit marriage fraud because, from his perspective, she was just a good mother trying to take care of him and his sister, while their biological father worked overseas. The moral complexity of the situation crystallized in that moment. Carmela wasn't a cartoon villain who had set out to destroy my life. She was a stepmother trying to provide for 2 children with insufficient resources, who had made increasingly desperate choices when presented with a solution that seemed too good to refuse. That didn't excuse what she'd done to me, but it explained it in a way that made me feel complicit in my own victimization. "I'm not mad at your mama," I told Carlo, which wasn't entirely true, but seemed like the right thing to say to a worried child. Adults sometimes have complicated problems, and we don't always handle them well. "Will you still help with my school?" Sophia asked, and the innocent hope in her voice nearly broke my heart. I looked at Carmela, who was watching this conversation with an expression of pure anguish. She knew exactly what she'd put me in this position, where walking away meant disappointing children who had done nothing wrong except hope for a better future. "We'll see, sweetheart," I said, which was the kind of non-answer adults give when they don't know how to tell a child that the world is more complicated and crueler than she understands. My final days in the Philippines were a masterclass in emotional and financial manipulation, disguised as family responsibility and cultural obligation. Even after the truth was exposed, even after I'd confronted Carmela about her lies and met the children who would suffer from my departure, the family wasn't finished with me. They had one more play to make, and it was devastatingly effective. The morning after our confrontation, Carmela's father arrived at my hotel with a folder of his own. "Sir Marcus," he said, settling into the chair across from me in the lobby, "I have something to show you." Inside his folder were vendor contracts, receipts, and signed agreements for our wedding that was now obviously cancelled. Church rental, 100,000 pesos, paid in advance, non-refundable. Reception venue, 350,000 pesos, 50% deposit already paid. Catering, 180,000 pesos, deposit paid. Flowers, photography, musicians, all with deposits paid and cancellation clauses that would cost me thousands of dollars. "These are all paid?" I asked, looking at figures that totaled nearly $15,000 in non-refundable deposits. "We used the money you gave Carmela for wedding planning," he said. "In Filipino culture, when man proposes marriage, he takes responsibility for wedding costs. Family pays deposits to show serious commitment." It was brilliant in its simplicity. Every dollar I'd given Carmela for emergencies and family obligations had apparently been funneled into wedding expenses that created a financial obligation even if the wedding was cancelled. They had turned my generosity into a legal contract. "What if I just leave?" I asked. "What happens to these contracts?" "Vendors will demand payment. If family cannot pay, they will take legal action. Carmela's name is on these contracts too. She will be held responsible for debts." They had trapped me perfectly. I could walk away, but doing so would leave Carmela and her family liable for thousands of dollars in wedding expenses that I had effectively authorized by giving her the money to pay for them. The family that had deceived me would be financially ruined by my departure. "How much to cancel everything cleanly?" I asked. Carmela's father consulted his papers. "Cancellation fees, vendor penalties, family obligations. Maybe 400,000 pesos, about $8,000 USD. $8,000 to end a relationship that had already cost me over $30,000. It felt like being mugged by people who insisted they were doing me a favor, but I was trapped by my own psychology. Despite everything that had happened, despite knowing I'd been lied to and manipulated, I couldn't bring myself to financially destroy a family that included 2 innocent children. "I'll pay the cancellation fees," I said, "but then we're done. No more contact, no more requests, no more family obligations." "Of course," he said, but something in his eyes suggested this wasn't entirely over. The money transfer took most of the day, involving trips to 3 different banks and hours of paperwork. Carmela accompanied me, quiet and subdued, occasionally trying to make conversation that I didn't reciprocate. "Marcus," she said as we waited at the final bank, "I know you hate me now, but I want you to know that my feelings for you were real. Not everything was pretend." "It doesn't matter anymore," I said, which was both true and false. It did matter, but not in a way that changed anything. "Will you ever forgive me?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I understand why you did it, but understanding isn't the same as forgiveness." When the last payment was processed, and all the vendors had been notified of the cancellation, I felt empty rather than relieved. I'd paid $8,000 to end a relationship that should never have begun, to escape obligations I'd never knowingly agreed to protect a family that had treated me like a walking ATM. The taxi to the airport the next morning was the longest ride of my life, not because of the distance, but because it felt like I was leaving behind more than just a bad relationship. I was leaving behind the last hope I'd had for a different kind of life, for love that would make my retirement years meaningful instead of just endless. Carmela didn't come to see me off. We'd said our goodbyes at the hotel, awkward and formal, like business partners concluding an unsuccessful venture. "Take care of yourself," she said. "Take care of the children," I replied, and meant it despite everything. The flight back to Portland gave me 14 hours to process what had happened to me, but even now, 6 months later, I'm still trying to understand how I let myself be so thoroughly deceived. The numbers tell part of the story. Nearly $40,000, spent over 6 months on someone who was never available to be with me. But the financial loss, devastating as it was to my retirement plans, wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the realization that I had been a willing participant in my own deception. Every red flag I'd ignored, every question I hadn't asked, every inconsistency I'd rationalized away, they all added up to a pattern of willful blindness that made me complicit in what happened. I'd wanted to believe in Carmela's story because the alternative meant returning to the loneliness that had driven me to seek companionship online in the first place. When friends and family asked what happened to my grand romantic adventure in the Philippines, I gave them a sanitized version. We realized we weren't compatible. The cultural differences were too great. It was better to end things before making a bigger mistake. I was too ashamed to tell them the truth about how easily I'd been manipulated, how desperate I'd been for connection, that I'd ignored obvious warning signs and handed over my retirement savings to strangers who saw me as nothing more than a source of income. The hardest part was admitting to myself that Carmela hadn't been entirely wrong about my motivations. I had gone to the Philippines looking for something I could buy: youth, beauty, gratitude, the feeling of being needed and important to someone. I'd convinced myself it was love. But love doesn't require constant financial transactions. Love doesn't come with a price list for family emergencies and wedding expenses. What I'd been buying was the fantasy of being loved by someone young and beautiful, who would be grateful for my generosity and attention. The fact that Carmela was selling a different fantasy, one where my money would solve her family's problems and secure her children's future, didn't make either of us innocent. We were both using each other, but she was better at it than I was. 6 months later, I still get occasional messages from Carmela on various social media platforms, usually around holidays or when she's facing some new financial crisis. They're always apologetic, always explaining some emergency that requires help, always promising that this would be the last time she'd ask for anything. I don't respond anymore, but I don't block her either. Some masochistic part of me wants to see how long she'll keep trying, whether she'll ever accept that the ATM is permanently out of order. The private investigator, Tony Reyes, sent me one final report about a month after I returned to Portland. Miguel had come home from Saudi Arabia earlier than expected after being injured on a construction site. He was recovering and looking for work in the Philippines. Carmela was still working at the dental clinic, still raising his children, still living in their house with the mortgage they couldn't really afford. They were still married, still struggling, still looking for ways to make ends meet in an economy that offered limited opportunities for families like theirs. I wondered if Miguel knew about me, about the wedding that had been planned and cancelled, about the thousands of dollars his wife had extracted from a lonely American man. I wondered if he would judge her for what she'd done or thank her for helping to support his children while he was away. Probably both. The lesson I learned: the one that cost me $40,000 and a chunk of my faith in human nature, is that genuine love can't be purchased, no matter how willing you are to pay for it. What can be bought is the performance of love, the appearance of devotion, the feeling of being important to someone beautiful, and sometimes if you're lonely enough and desperate enough, the performance feels real enough to justify the price. But it never lasts because the person selling it is always looking for a better deal, and the person buying it eventually realizes they're paying for something that doesn't actually belong to them. I'm back in Portland now, living alone in the same apartment I'd planned to abandon for a new life in the Philippines. The loneliness that drove me to seek love online is still here, but it's different now. It's been tempered by the hard-earned wisdom that being alone with dignity is better than being used with false companionship. I've deleted all the dating apps from my phone. I've stopped looking for someone to fill the empty spaces in my retirement. Instead, I'm learning to be comfortable with my own company, to find meaning in small daily routines rather than grand romantic gestures. It's not the life I'd imagined for my golden years, but it's honest in a way. My relationship with Carmela never was. And honesty, I've learned, is worth more than all the beautiful lies money can buy.